Welcome to The Authority File, the podcast that features conversations about the life cycle of scholarly communication. I'm Bill Mickey, the editorial director at Choice. We talk a lot about open access on this podcast, and models for open access monographs are an especially interesting topic for us. We've been fortunate enough to have MIT Press guest for several series to talk about its Direct to Open program, a collective funding model that opens the press's monographs across STEM and the humanities. Over the last few years, we've talked about its origins, launch, and progress, but no matter who we're talking to regarding open access, we typically only speak anecdotally about one of the most important participants in OA monograph publishing, researchers themselves. Well, that changes with this four-part series underwritten by our friends at MIT Press, where we discuss the benefits that authors see from publishing their texts via the direct-to-open model, and some of these benefits might be ones you haven't thought of. Joining me in this series are Dr. Janaki Srinivasan, Associate Professor of Digital South Asian Studies at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute and author of The Political Lives of Information. David Kunkel, Professor of Media Studies at Northern Illinois University and author of Person, Thing, Robot, a 2024 Choice Outstanding Academic Title. And Amy Harris, MIT Press Senior Manager, Library Relations and Sales. In this third episode of our series, we welcome Dr. Janaki Srinivasan to the program. Janaki talks about her own experience and priorities with publishing her title open. Also in this episode, Amy will quantify citation advantages and citation diversity for D2O authors. All right, Janaki, welcome to the program, and Amy, welcome back.
Hey, Bill.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, so Janaki, we'll start with you. Your 2022 book, The Political Lives of Information, looks at the circulation of information in India for social change. Given this topic, why was it so crucial for you to publish open?
Thanks, Bill. So, like you pointed out, my book really looks at um, uh, the politics of information and how it circulates in different parts of India. And one of the cases that I use in the book is uncovering the early history of the right to information campaigns in India. So, this is a legislation that's the equivalent of the freedom of information
Mm.
legislations in the US and the UK. Um, and of course, what I'm trying to do here is to try and understand what is it that citizens want from the state, what kind of records do they want opened up, etc. So it's all about opening up files and records and papers in detail. So it would have been particularly ironic if I wrote this in a book that was then not accessible to people. So I think that was one of the reasons that it was very important for me that this book that told the story of the right to information campaign, besides other cases, was something that was easily accessible and open for people to access. I think that's where the topic of my book itself and this larger conversation around open access align.
Yeah, that's a good point. And were you actually thinking of that as you were putting the book together, or was this something that came up perhaps as you were working with, MIT Press on this?
Uh, Truth be told, it came up when I was working with the press
Hmm.
because, as we all know, when we're doing field work, we hope that eventually it'll take some form, but we're not thinking about it that concretely.
Yeah.
But once you sort of got into the publishing process, and I was just trying to imagine who might access it, where, etc., it became very quickly clear that I don't want it in a format where accessing it would have been hard, especially in India, where all the stories in my book take place and where I would have liked people to get access to it easily and be able to read it if they so wished.
hmm So then, it sounds like the nature of your research and, and really what you write about merge well with the mission of open access. And I'm thinking about particularly the publication of data information, which is kind of, what you were writing about in this book. But I mean, going forward, is this something for you that will be of continued interest in terms of publishing open?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, some of these are things that you think will happen, hope will happen. And then once a book is open access, I think there are also other things about it that you gradually discover. And my experience with it definitely has been great.
Hmm.
And I could say a bunch of things about some of the ways in which it helped expand, I think, the audience for my book, or make it easier for the people who would have wanted to read it. um, but I guess we could get to that
Yeah,
going forward.
exactly. Yep, I do have a question on that coming up. But Amy, anything you want to add in terms of what you're seeing on the publishing side, with some of these topics that authors or researchers are publishing about that really lend themselves to that OA model?
Well, I think we're discovering things about that because of how we've approached opening books with direct to open. We're not picking and choosing. We're
Mm,
not
yeah.
we didn't get a fund that allowed us only to open art and architecture books. We're opening everything that we can,
Hmm.
which means that we're opening fields that were not well funded before, especially in the humanities and social sciences. And we're seeing a higher citation and usage advantage for those books, which really, when you think about the narrative around the quote unquote crisis in the humanities, it isn't a problem with the content. It's a problem with the business model. When these ideas are out there, they're used, they're appreciated, they often reach audiences outside of academia. In particular, we had an author based at Dartmouth College here in the US who said that her monograph on homelessness in New England, the fact that it was open access meant that social workers who have no money to
Mm.
purchase research monographs were able to access the work, people working in the communities that she was talking about. And that is huge for these works to be able to, as we say, cross over to government agencies, other institutions or professional institutions outside of the academy. It's been extremely helpful.
Excellent, thank you. Um, And then, sort of going back to you, Janaki, building on what you just said earlier, your research area looks at communities in India. How does open book publishing help you reach non-Western audiences and the communities impacted by your research? Why is this so vital to the scholarship? And, is there potential for OA to create a more mutually beneficial relationship between researchers and readers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. And I think that is definitely the case. The reason I should back up a little and say the reason for me MIT Press was a great venue was that I was writing a book that was about information and information technology, but the social implications of that. And I
Hmm.
definitely wanted this to be a book that was not only for, I would have liked it to be non academics too, should find it accessible. But even within academia, it was important to me that it not go only to the social scientists or only to the technologists. And MIT Press that way was great because it accessed both kinds of audiences, and that's the reason I wanted to go with MIT Press. But that said, my book is all set in India, and like you pointed out earlier, I'm looking at information, but given the current interest in the politics of data and the things that we're sort of encountering every day in terms of what we have access to, what is closed off to us, and why, and so on and so forth. The topic of my book, this idea of politics of information, was broadly interesting. And of course, all my research was done in different parts of India. So, to that extent, it was very important to me that the book reach India. But the paperback edition didn't actually have a South Asian edition. So I knew even going into the contract that this would be something that would be expensive because it would be priced in dollars. But then we also had the pandemic, which meant it ended up being even more expensive. And Amy already spoke to the point that social science in general doesn't it's not really known for having resources, right? Which is exactly the case in India as well, except
Mm,
there's another layer on top, which means it's not just Indian expensive, it's a dollar exchange rate expensive.
right.
So this was something that I was really worried about in terms of reach. And I think open access just made that really simple for me, because I could go back to the English speaking parts of some of the sites where I had done my research. I'll admit it wasn't everybody, but some of the activists, for instance, who were involved in the Right to Information campaign, among others, um, these were all people I could actually just send the URL of the book to, or just let people know that this was accessible should they want to go and just get it. So it made a huge difference, I think. And not just in terms of me assuming ahead of time that this is going to be accessible to them, but even things like, when I'm talking about the book, this was not something I had foreseen, but if I was talking about the book and at the end of that conversation, I just want to say, please read the book. And I really
Hmm.
want them to engage with the ideas in the book. I hadn't thought this through, but once I started doing it, I realized how much more awkward it would have been to say, please read the book. And also, it's going to cost you X amount, which wouldn't have been a small amount. So
Right.
this was something that just came out of the experience of going through with this open access, I think.
Hmm. And it's interesting. I mean, we're not talking about, although it would be nice. I mean, we're not talking about uh, boosting sales volume, really. I mean, it's really about accessibility, as you've mentioned, and Amy, as you've talked about earlier. Just that sort of volume model isn't workable in these instances. It's more about access and affordability and that kind of thing. All right. So, Amy, can you provide any quantitative metrics? I mean, you had mentioned some of the citation advantages, but can you give us some details on that and citation diversity for D2O authors? And then, can you address the kinds of data you're paying special attention to that offer clues about, publishing OA?
Yes, of course. So, as I said before, we've seen a consistent citation advantage for our direct to open titles over their paywalled counterparts, especially in the first months and years after a book is published. OA books get out in the world and get cited faster than their paywalled counterparts. And the other heartening trend that I mentioned before is that we have seen a greater advantage for our humanities and social sciences books. I think they're used 2 to 4 times more than their
Hmm.
paywalled counterparts, and cited much more, even as opposed to our STEM science books.
Hmm.
In other words, it appears that open access is helping them more. And I actually wish I had the time and resources to do more studies, because at this point, MIT Press has more than 6 years of data from a period where we were publishing open access titles and paywall titles in tandem in the same fields, especially during that experimentation time when we were developing the model. And unfortunately, I don't have time to do that work often, but I'm a big fan of the work that the amazing informatricians at Curtin University's Center for Culture and Technology do. And they released a fascinating report about a year ago titled Open Access Research Outputs Receive More Diverse Citations. Their methods are sophisticated enough that they were able to investigate exactly what you mentioned, the diversity of citations, specifically to assess the quality of usage on open access research. They were asking, are people just downloading these works because they can, or are they really engaging with them? And they thought measuring that would ultimately allow them to conclude what they concluded, which is that open access works, including books, drew more citations from a broader reader base than their closed counterparts. Um, Speaking personally, we really rely on digital science's dimensions for our citation data and don't have the staff to do the additional work to find where the citations are coming from globally, but I would love to. In the meantime, I'm pretty sure that the folks at Curtin drew on datasets that include MIT Press publications, and we've contributed our data to quite a few independent studies of open access impact.
Excellent. Thank you, Amy. You had mentioned sort of in the before days, before D2O, you were publishing, MIT Press was publishing OA and paywall in tandem. Can you remind us, like, what what that was, and how that was working?
Oh, yes. So, well, one of my favorite things about working with MIT Press is that there really is a spirit of experimentation and innovation. And we received a grant from the Arcadia Foundation that allowed us to fund some works to be open access. And we were able to evaluate once again alongside paywall books that we were publishing at the same time in the same way in the same fields and see what the impacts were on print run, how many copies we sold, what happened with usage, what happened with citation. And that was a part of how we researched and developed the direct to open model. That
Okay.
was how we figured out like what kind of funding goals do we need to set in order to make this work.
You just heard from Dr. Janaki Srinivasan, Associate Professor of Digital South Asian Studies at the University of Oxford's Internet Institute and author of The Political Lives of Information, and Amy Harris, MIT Press Senior Manager, Library Relations and Sales. Join us next week when we learn about how international OA can drive translation and licensing conversations, how it benefits research disciplines more broadly, and we'll hear some forward-looking thoughts on MIT's D2O program. This episode was brought to you with generous support from MIT Press. As always, underwriting opportunities for the Authority File podcast are directed by Choice's advertising director, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer, with support from digital media assistant Ashley Roy. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.